Namaskar and welcome to Sansad Television. I am Vishal Dahiya and you're watching our show Perspective, where we bring you detailed analysis of key national and international issues. Today we're going to talk about the meeting of G20 Foreign Ministers under India's presidency, which was held in New Delhi on Thursday. Now, delegates at the meeting held 2 rounds of discussions on contemporary challenges around multilateralism, food and energy security, development cooperation, countering new and emerging threats, global skill mapping and HADR issues as well. Now, the outcome document issued at the end reiterated the need for a more inclusive and reinvigorated multilateralism and reform aimed at implementing the 2030 agenda. Expressing concern over the challenges to global food security exacerbated by current conflicts and tensions, the G20 foreign ministers called for keeping supply chains for both food and agriculture products, including fertilizers, reliable, open and transparent. Now, delegates at the meeting also reaffirmed the steadfast commitments to tackle climate change and achieve global net zero greenhouse gas emissions or carbon neutrality by or around mid-century. Terrorism in all its forms was also condemned at the meeting, saying holistic approach on the basis of international law can effectively counter terrorism. There was no consensus on a joint statement after the meeting because of opposition from China and Russia to a reference to the Ukraine war in the draft communique. So today we'll discuss and analyze all aspects of this G20 foreign ministers meeting, what exactly happened, what transpired, the significance of it, and the key discussions or key decisions being taken after those discussions at this meeting. And for more on this, we're joined by a distinguished panel of experts. Let me first introduce them to you, beginning with former investor Yogesh Gupta is joining us. We also have with us Pramitpal Chaudhary. He is Foreign Affairs Editor with Hindustan Times. And Dr. Gulshan Sachdeva, Professor with the Center for European Studies at JNU, is also with us. Welcome, all of you gentlemen, to Sansad Television. I'll begin with you, Pramit. I have laid down some aspects of what transpired based on the outcome document which was released after the meeting. But in your understanding, how would you summarize the G20 Foreign Ministers meeting vis-a-vis all the issues which were at hand for discussion?
I would argue that the main goal of India at this foreign ministers meeting was to try and find agreeable language to overcome the very clear geopolitical divides that are now afflicting the G20. India's goal at the summit is to try and get an agreement on global issues, particularly on climate change, green finance, green hydrogen standards, biofuels, as well as things like crypto taxation and so on. These are not issues that are geopolitical per se, but the geopolitics can get in the way of a common global understanding on these issues. So the foreign ministers meeting was trying to find, can we get some kind of language that all sides would agree to, so that we can sort of put aside the geopolitics and focus on the big global issues that the G20 summit will try to handle in September. The divides are very clear. The West broadly, especially Europe versus Russia, and of course, US versus China. Unfortunately, what we seem to be seeing is that these divides are now merging together, and it's Russia and China versus the rest of the West.
Okay.
And so this is the problem that India was trying to overcome. At the Bali summit, we had seen India get the Russians to agree to certain language, that this is not the era of war. This time we have seen the Russians dig in their heels, possibly because of Chinese encouragement, and say, no, we don't want this kind of language anymore. So I believe that we're still trying diplomatically to get that over, but there are probably going to be a few more iterations. Mm-hmm. But the point is that if we don't get this done, this was going to infect the main summit in September, and so there will be further attempts to try and bridge that gap.
Okay. So that remains an issue which needs to be dealt with diplomatically out there. Let me bring in Mr. Yogesh Gupta here as well. Mr. Gupta, all of us are aware of this fact that, given the present geopolitical situation, specifically the Russia-Ukraine conflict, these kind of meetings wherein all stakeholders involved, which somehow or the other over the past year or more than that do not see eye to eye with each other. It was not going to be an easy task to have that diplomatic conversation out there, or to come to an agreement on almost all issues. But given the kind of message which is there in the outcome document, and also the fact that Russia and China didn't seem to agree with the wording on the Ukraine war part, how would you look at the key achievements, the key takeaways? Because this is going to be, as Pramit was pointing out, the basis for the leadership summit later in the year.
No, I agree with Pramit ji. It is summing up of the outcome that we have got. And we have to keep in mind the prevailing international situation, particularly the state of the US-China rivalry, which has hardened much more since the days of Bali summit. And if I can mention a few specifics, the balloon incident where the Chinese sent a balloon over the US, and now more recently, all this sparring over the Taiwan Strait, the way the Americans sent their Poseidon reconnaissance flights and the Chinese have reacted. So the rivalry has hardened, and in this atmosphere, it is very difficult to get some sort of a consensus on such a dividing issue like Ukraine, where there are very different viewpoints between the West and Russia, China. And I also agree with this point that it is basically China's, I think, encouragement of Russia, which has really kind of marred in the outcome, in the sense of not getting a consensus language on Ukraine. Otherwise, we could achieve that at Bali. So I think in the given circumstances that we had, I think we have achieved a good document which highlights the priorities that we had for the developing countries, and we have been able to achieve a consensus on the key other key issues like energy, food security, debt, climate change, and others. So I think there are reasons to be happy in what we have got, and there are, of course, a few other signals. I understand that there was some sort of a brief encounter between the US Secretary of State and the Russian foreign minister, though a brief one at the summit, but at the foreign ministers meeting, which is a positive. And there were also meetings between our external affairs minister and the Chinese foreign minister. That is also good.
Okay.
It's important to meet, particularly with countries with whom our relations are not in a great shape.
Okay.
So I think there are a lot of positives, and we should be quite happy at what we have got.
Okay. Dr. Sachdeva, Prime Minister in his address before the foreign ministers meeting made a very significant remark where he said that no group can claim global leadership without listening to those affected by its decisions, and that seemed to be reflecting in most of the points in the outcome document as well, be it when we're talking about tackling climate change, energy security, food supply chains as well, and of course the reference was of course to the ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine as well. So how do you think is the path ahead? Because there is a lot of talk about reforms for multilateral forums as well, something which India has advocated over the years.
Well, I think, the way the Prime Minister set the tone for the meeting, that, the global governance has failed and there is a serious crisis in this whole multilateralism. So in that particular context and the kind of geopolitical tensions we have and the Ukraine, and particularly, from both sides, I think since Bali, as my other co-panelist has mentioned, since Bali, things have even moved further, tensions have even risen further. So within that, the kind of situation we are in, I think one is, of course, India is also trying to portray that, we have to bring the whole voices of the global South into the G20, people, those who are not sitting at the table here, because their concerns also need to be brought at the table, at the agenda. So that has also been one of the major issues which India has been highlighting in almost all the meetings, and including in this meeting. But if you look at overall, I think one can look at the overall development in two ways. One is, of course, one has to be satisfied that, on all this prevailing kind of situation, what we have. So on all other major issues which actually affect the global South, whether it's energy crisis or SDGs or and many other climate change and all other issues, there is a broad consensus. So out of 24 paragraphs, on 22 paragraphs, there is an agreement. So of course, on the Ukraine, things have become even worse than what we achieved in Bali at G20. But when you have the crisis at the global multilateralism. So can G20 deliver something? We know that in the last 1 year at the UNSC, you had almost 50 meetings on Ukraine without any outcome, because one of the permanent members of the UNSC is direct party to this conflict. So within that context, I think that this is why, again, the next couple of months are going to be again tough, for India, because every major issue now, whatever we talk, but this is being affected by Ukraine war, the whole global economy, and the whole other issues which are going to be affected. So, so there is a problem here. How do you really resolve and to come to a certain kind of agreement among G20? Because if there is also, I would say, deadlock within G20, where we are not able to achieve a consensus here, so the same kind of problems what many other multilateral institutions are facing, we also start facing within G20 itself. Because this was a kind of a platform where, that UN was in crisis and the UNSC is not working. At the same time, you could not really, resolve issues of the global South and the global issues at G7 level. G20 was a kind of a platform where we could really, the hope is, and hope has been that G20 would be able to resolve many of those issues. So we have to work very hard in the next couple of months. But it's, the thing is, on other issues which are, so now the focus, as you have rightly mentioned, India is trying to bring issue of the global South and the developing countries, and then other issues, of course, are being discussed. But at the moment, I think there is a very little consensus on those issues.
Okay. So India being the voice of global South, issues related to that aspect as well. Pramit, on this issue of what kind of direction or what kind of path does this meeting sets for tangible achievements at the Leaders Summit, in September this year, when all the leaders of G20 countries will sit together in terms of various issues, which are of concern to the global South, to entire global community as well, be it climate change, food security, energy security, global health, development cooperation, counter-terrorism, counter-narcotics as well. All these are issues of concern to the entire globe and specifically to the global South as well.
So the government is very clear. Foreign Minister Jaishankar said green finance is the priority. Because India needs an estimated $4 trillion between now and 2070 to achieve its net zero emissions. And it's understood to be an existential crisis for India and the rest of the world. The problem is that right now, the vast bulk of private capital flows to green energy is basically from developed countries or to other developed countries. Very little comes to emerging economies, even less goes to LDCs. The World Bank and all these other organizations are simply too small to handle the kind of numbers we're looking or need, the kind of finance we need. So the first game that India has been trying to do is that if there's going to be a post-Bretton Woods structure, at the heart of this has to be something around green finance. And there we are getting support from everybody verbally. Every government is saying, we fully agree with this. This makes perfect sense. And then the politics gets involved. So what we need to do is try to figure out how to get around that. At the worst, I would say what we'll see is the G20 fails, perhaps, or comes up with language on this, but some kind of grouping within the G20, maybe a G13 or a G14, India, the G7 countries, Brazil, and so on, forming an informal understanding or forming a different organization afterwards to work around this, especially if China opts out and said, we're going to do it on our own. And building a similar structure, but basically saying no longer G20, it's just going to be a cluster of countries within the G20.
Okay.
Green hydrogen is about standards. Everybody's doing their own green hydrogen. There are, last count, 14 different green hydrogen standards around the world. The EU alone has at least 3. If this doesn't work out, green hydrogen will become a trade protectionist device, that the steel made in India with a certain kind of green hydrogen standard is unacceptable in other countries. Export of heavy industry will basically cease to exist, automobiles and so on. That has to be worked out because it's a major problem on trade. Again, potentially, you'll have to form a union of countries that is short of the G20. The global South, the number one issue is correctly, Gupta mentioned the issue of debt. At present, we saw what happened in Sri Lanka. You see Pakistan on the verge of potential default. About 12 other countries, mainly in Africa, are on the verge of default or economic collapse because of the debt problems they face.
Okay.
China is a huge source of that problem. We're seeing that in Sri Lanka, where they're refusing to come in and join the debt restructuring. You're seeing them do this even with their own ally, Pakistan. Okay. They are proving to be completely unhelpful. So again, we may have to do a G20 minus solution, but the G20 will set the tone and hopefully set the language for that.
Okay. Ambassador Gupta, not only this aspect which Pramit is referring to, but also what I was asking, Dr. Sachdeva earlier, in terms of reforms at the multilateral, forums level, be it United Nations we're talking about, or various other forums which India is part of, in terms of, actionable decisions being taken at these forums, not just discussions.
And as far as the reforms issue is concerned, it has been a ticklish issue for quite some time because, again, there is no consensus or there is no agreement on views between a group of countries, and the external situation has only gotten worse. So I really doubt whether we can expect a great lot in terms of reforms of the United Nations or the other institutions. So in the prevailing situation, I think we have to work around what is possible. And as Pramitji has said, some of these issues like climate change, which are staring us in face, and which are energy issues, energy security, that's another big issue for us. And, the issues of food, issues of fuel, issues of debt. These are all issues which are of great importance to us in other developing countries. And I think there we have to focus much more. I really doubt if we can expect a great deal of progress on issues of reform of these institutions at this juncture, though of course we should keep trying. Okay.
Dr. Sachdeva, after the COVID pandemic, which the world has faced for 2-3 long years, the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war as well, the tussle between, major powers in the world, be it US versus China or US versus Russia as well. In these situations, what kind of sense do you get after this high-profile meeting in terms of the way forward for issues which are of very importance, grave concern to the entire world, be it climate change, as Ambassador Gupta was referring to, be it the issues of energy security, food security, most important, ensuring reliable and open supply chains?
Well, one has to be very clear about one or two things. One is that, the competencies of the G20 are basically in the trade and economic matters and financial matters. That's what the whole, the group was set up. So at the same time, whatever is actually being even agreed at the G20, that has to be operationalized and implemented at various other forums, various other agencies. So it means first, the idea is basically you get a certain consensus among the 19 economies and the European Union, which are it means the bulk of the large economies, they come to a certain consensus here, particularly on economic matters. And then those issues would later on would be implemented by other institutions of global economic governance. That's what the whole agenda, the whole idea of the G20 has been. But now the problem is that when issues like Ukraine is kind of dominating the broader discussion, even if, as you can see from even the outcome document, almost all other issues, as our external affairs minister has also mentioned during his briefing, that except for those two paragraphs, there is a more or less consensus on broader issues. So then yes, but the question is, all those issues which are again we agreed here will have to be implemented and operationalized in various other agencies, where all other kind of power play is also going to be, power play has to be there. So, but the problem is that when geopolitics start dominating too much here, I mean, argument is that, since Ukraine war is affecting all your economic decisions and the economies, so we can't just bypass, the strategic and security issues from, that's what the Western argument has been. That's why they bring otherwise there's no point bringing. In fact, this is what the Russian foreign minister was also mentioning, I think in one of his comments here, that when many other things were happening, when all the adventures by the West, those issues are never brought to the agenda of G20. Now, suddenly, why Ukraine war has to be there on the top of the agenda of G20 and the whole discussion, the narrative of G20 at the moment, if you can see, when you look at, the press briefing of the foreign minister or earlier by the foreign secretary before the meeting, most of the questions by, from the journalists, they were about Ukraine war. Although, in fact, that's not really, resolving Ukraine war is not really the agenda of the G20 per se. This is there are other issues, which of course there are problems in the UNSC that they have not been able to resolve, but this is not the place where it has to happen.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Okay. So a broader consensus on most of the issues has to be achieved, specifically with respect to trade, economy, and climate change issues as well. And then those issues will have to be dealt with at other forums, as Dr. Sachdeva is pointing out. Thank you so much, Dr. Sachdeva, Pramit as well, and Ambassador Gupta for sharing your valuable inputs and insight with us and our viewers, as well as our experts were pointing out or analyzing rather the outcome document of the G20 Foreign Ministers meet. Various aspects, various issues which are of concern not only to the global south but also to the entire global community were discussed at the meeting, and various commitments were also given by all these leaders. And we'll keep a close watch on all the happenings on the G20 front till the Leaders Summit, which takes place in September this year. Till then, keep watching Sansad Television. Thank you.